Next up is the man who has been instrumental in shaping the new direction of one of the largest tech companies in the world from behind the scenes.
Starting today, our company is now Meta.
They have spent billions of dollars on what Zuckerberg believes is the future for Facebook Meta.
It's extremely unprofitable.
The stock's down 70%.
Mark Zuckerberg's empire is collapsing all around him. Nonetheless, he's refused to stop.
Meta earnings are out. Better than expected. The stock is now up over 9%.
Now up 68%. Zuckerberg's plan is paying off.
This is going to go down as one of the biggest turnarounds of all time.
This is a stock that continues to go higher.
Welcome to the stage, the director of Metaverse content at Meta, Anand.
Yeah, so how do you feel? I mean, you guys had quite the turnaround. I mean, I remember when we're down to $80, everybody was like throwing stones at me saying, see, the metaverse is dead. And it's a little bit of a redemption arc.
Okay, just a couple of, before I answer that question, any press in the room? You don't? Okay.
Blockworks in the room right now? Blockworks, raise your hand.
Can you guys hear me?
No?
Yes, better?
No Blockworks? Cool, then no press.
No press, okay. I'll try to be as candid as possible.
Yes.
And if you're tweeting or putting it on LinkedIn, please don't get me fired. Because otherwise it's kind of going to be a boring conversation. I'll have to tell you only what I can tell you, assuming it's going to be in public. Here's my take on your original question. Nothing is ever bad as it seems, and nothing is ever great as it seems. Like in the span of 30 seconds, you probably captured 2 months of the roller coaster ride. That's like a microcycle, as you call it, in action. Oh man, Meta sucks. Like the stock went to 89. I just checked my ticker this morning. It's at 237, 33 or something like that. 4x'd, right? Mark doesn't run the company by trying to manage the stock price. So when shit went down, we were like, they're betting against us. Fuck them. We'll keep working on it. And when things are going great, we're like, they don't understand what we're doing. They think we're great. I mean, cool, whatever, right? And so I think there's a certain amount of like, what I call is like jaded equanimity. I was around for the first 2008. I was in college during 2000, so I didn't see the dot-com bust except for I knew people a few years ahead of me who lost a bunch of money in WebWAN. But I was around for 2008, and the sky was falling. And I remember like people walking into Bear Stearns and Lehman, and their cards not working. I saw that, and like really people I like knew like really well. Then I saw the last bus cycle somewhere before the QE
crash?
Yeah, QE FX kicked in. So, I mean, after a point, you're like, it really comes down to what do you believe in? And you have the guts to persist. The signal that we learned through all of this is we've got to get better at prioritization, because when there's abundance of capital, you don't have to make hard choices. Oh, there's a project here, there's a project there. The two teams working on this, different approaches. We don't know what's going to work. Like, cool, go for it. And now we're like, why do two projects need to exist? And, you know, as a part of the efficiency process, we've shut down products. We talked about this last night.
Yeah, I feel like my whole stance, it's funny because during our last, also being candid, you know, during our Metaverse Fund launch event, it was a little bit of like the crypto metaverse against the metaverse, you know, like the big brother kind of like energy that we sometimes get. Back then, I think Meta was painted that way. But I think over the last few years, a couple things have happened. One, I think Zuck has become a little bit of like a wartime president, where A's become very much in charge, like you said, like more in the day-to-day, like saying, hey, you know what, we're laying people off, we're doing what is necessary to make that vision happen. We're doubling down on something nobody, like a lot of people judge. It's not about the shareholders, it's about a vision. And three, what I've really loved seeing is focusing on building the community and building the ecosystem versus trying to own it all. And at least that's been my observation where Meta's become really now an ecosystem player, like supporting with grants, with funding, with support, because ultimately, as it stands right now, the consumer-facing metaverse is Meta.
Yeah, so a couple of reactions. Mark has always been like this. I've been in the company for 7 years. I was there before Cambridge Analytica, when we were the darling of everybody. Then everybody started hating us. And like, having seen both sides of the equation, I think, having been on the inside, Meta is one of the most misunderstood companies. Like, and that comes from a place of like, we don't, I mean, maybe to a fault, and I think Mark talks about this as, I'm not looking to be popular. If I have to make the hard decisions, I'll make the hard decisions, but it's not a popularity contest. And I think sometimes because of that, we make these decisions and we're not yet communicating clearly. So the thing that you talked about where in the last few years you see a shift is our ability to communicate what matters to us and why we believe in what we believe. That has shifted for sure. And Mark has publicly declared this, and this is probably going to be the biggest place where you'll see difference between Meta and others who are rushing into XR now, and we've been at it since 2014 when we acquired Oculus. This will be an open effort. Like, we are not going to build the metaverse, we're going to build for the metaverse. It's not going to be a closed, locked in, fully integrated first body experience, if you know what I mean. Like, it's not going to be that. So that's why you see us. So I think the communication, we're trying to get better with how we communicate our intent. And we've declared openness as how we're going to approach this.
Yeah. On that note, just a side note, like I think a few years ago was also the first time Mark started doing public appearances, like podcasts. I think Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, and the more he showed his vulnerabilities and also, said uncomfortable things, the more people liked him. Actually, it's more human. Now, to get to the big question, which was, I think my slides kind of answer with the S-curve. Why are you guys re-risking everything, so to say, and making like a startup level bet almost? What's the vision that you see what role does the metaverse play for the bigger ecosystem that is Facebook? Yeah, well, Meta with Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and so forth.
Why are we making startup level risk? But the answer to that question is like, why not if we can do it? It's really two things: belief and disruption. That's it. Like, we believe that. And I don't know, Inga's probably the back of the room. She says a lot. Like, everything is flat. And like, we didn't have the technologies to unflat things, but now you do. And what do I mean by that? Like, this is a three-dimensional experience. You can see our height, our weight, not our weight, like our XYZ, and I can see depth. But you can't see that on your internet. You're reading at a screen from far away. And I think as a successor, this will be a successor to the mobile internet because you'll have 3D simulations with identity and digital assets that you can be in as opposed to look at. So it might happen in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, who knows? Like, nobody can predict the timing, but it is inevitable. So we need to start now and build that. So that's one. In terms of like, so that's the belief part of it. The disruption part of this is we've lived under controlled platforms for a while now. Building on top of the mobile device, while it's a blessing for distribution, it's a curse because of, I don't know who I was talking to at dinner last night. I was showing them a dark design pattern on iOS where David and I talked about this. Like, it used to be that you could, when you go into your contacts and when you message someone, you long press, you used to get message, WhatsApp, and all the other like Signal and all these things. Now all you see is message. And if you're on iOS, you get blue. If not, you get the green bubble, right? Like, so there's a lot of like, and this happens with all the things being talked about with like the ATT changes as well. So I think there's a lot of stuff here where our ability to innovate is limited. And so the better solution is to just like go all in and build the next platform so that we can build what we think is going to be valuable to users and do it very responsibly this time around.
And that's key because at that point, you're reclaiming two things. One, of course, the economic channel, where you can, one, you control what goes on your platform. Two, you control information flow, but I think you guys started like, taking a new direction when it comes to the data. And then 3, the commercialization. Well, are you looking to do it differently than Apple? Or if you are in charge, would you do it similarly?
I don't know what Apple's plan is. Well, I guess no.
No, I mean in terms of the limiting access, like when it comes to, let's say, interoperability, where one of the cool things that you guys already started doing that I think brings it closest to that vision of the metaverse, where you can go from one app to another spatially, like the teleportation. Would it also be available, for example, being able to interact with people across different devices?
Yeah. So our belief is VR is going to be one device that allows you to connect into the metaverse, but not the only device. So device interoperability and platform interoperability is just like, this is why we have to decode the stuff that we put out. So when we say like, we're not building the metaverse, we're building for the metaverse. And the for is the important part. Like what is the equivalent of the HTTP protocol? None exists. The closest is probably the travel APIs and the party APIs inside Oculus SDK, which is kind of broken. We need to get better at it. So we're convinced that the only way to do this is to do it with interoperable ways. Otherwise, you kind of like, you use the word control. Yeah. That's not the operating word we think about. The operating word for us is consumer value. 2 simple examples to drive home that point. When you were at the lobby at Newhouse downstairs, you walked in with your suit. You did not have to take that off when you walked into this room because it was a Hartman Capital event. You carried your identity through and through, you owned it. But let's say you're in Roblox and then you go to Minecraft and then you come to Horizon Worlds, or you're in Shapes or watching a concert in Red Pill, like your stuff won't come through with you. Your identity systems are different and like that makes no sense, right? So the operating value for us is consumer value.
I guess that's a finish.
The trick, though, is not to conflate things like interoperability with consumer value. Consumers are not saying, I want to take my stuff to any metaverse that I go. They're like, I want to have fun in Roblox. I want to have fun in like Red Pill. I want to have fun in like whatever, gym class, VR, whatever it is, right? If you get in the way of fun, get that friction out. And interoperability is like, it adds friction if you don't have interoperability. So often companies over-optimize for interoperability up front, and like, if there's no consumer value, it does not matter.
It sounds like a crypto problem where, a lot of times we're like, everybody can uses NFTs so that they can own their things, but do they care about owning things or do they care about using them? And if it adds friction just for owning it doesn't make sense. And so I think there's like the happy medium between the two, where on one hand, maybe ownership and transferability is optional versus, being forced in a silo, so to say.
Yeah, the core experience needs to be phenomenal. And then people jump over all the walls to get to the core experience, and then you take the walls down, break it part by part by part, right?
What's your take on Web3 in general? I'm curious, because I know Instagram used to have like NFTs and stuff like that. Anything you can say about that?
Okay, that's a tough question. I'm not a Web3 expert.
Okay.
I'll tell you a funny story. If you go to my Twitter profile, you'll actually see a Bored Ape picture on my profile. I put this up when the micro cycle that you described was starting to ramp up. And I got a bunch of inbound DMs on Twitter saying, hey, we're running this project, we're running this token. A bunch of people pinged me saying, oh, NFT, this is cool. That is not an NFT. I took that photo on one of the murals on the walls in LA, near Venice Beach.
You didn't right-click save it, you took a photo of it?
I took a photo of the damn thing and I put it, and people thought it was an NFT, and they thought, oh, wow, you own a Bored Ape. Some stupid photo that like was an amazing artist who made it on a real world mural. It was that moment when I realized that like, okay, that thing is like not a thing.
I have to let you down. That way you can't get into Ape Fest. There's with another 100 dudes. So
I know, right? So when that happened, I realized that, oh, like this is not a thing because I can fake it and still it'll like people think I have the real NFT thing. So my answer on Web3 is I think the infrastructure is interesting for the long term. Mm-hmm. The consumer applications in the short term are probably bubbly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think the NFT bubble minus 89% is probably already getting pierced a little bit. So let's jump a little bit into the present. What are some of the biggest things that you're most excited about when it comes to like VR use cases? on two fronts. One, that you're actually seeing traction today. Like what are things, because I get this feedback sometimes from LPs or prospects. They say, hey, we got a headset. It's in the shelf. It's catching dust, right? But then there's others that are hardcore VR people that spend 2 hours every single day on there. You have the data more so than anybody. You know, what are people using already now where VR is ready as a medium?
Okay, a lot of questions wrapped up into that one question. But before I answer that, how many folks here are VR founders? 7, 8. How many are industry folks? I know Pearly is here, but anybody else? 2.
Where's there? 3.
3. Okay. What are the rest of y'all doing? Like LPs or no? I don't mean that as like a. Yeah. I don't mean to judge. I'm trying to understand the audience so that I'm not like I can answer that question to the level of fidelity that matters. How many LPs? Okay. Cool. So it's like a blended crowd. Your LPs headsets are gathering dust because they're in the late majority. You go talk to somewhere between a 16-year-old and a 28-year-old. Mm-hmm. They're living as early adopters, maybe starting to tip into early majority, and they're using the headset to hang out with others, primarily through games. We're starting to see fitness as a use case emerge. So I led the Supernatural acquisition from our side, and it is incredible. The rationale for that was purely based on the fact that working out is a grind. Nobody likes to work out. But when it's fun, people don't. They come for fun and they stay because they realize that their biomarkers have gotten better. That's the core thesis, like heart rate, like blood sugar levels, everything just got better. And so we see like fitness as a big opportunity. We see a lot of use cases around like edutainment, because you can't go to places and go in time to those places, and you can through edutainment, whether it's like hardcore like concerts, which are more blended, like more towards entertainment versus going to Mars or visiting the Jurassic. I think that's like a real thing. Wish fulfillment and escapism and joy and wonder and awe and magic and beauty is what made like the games use case work. It's going to be the same thing for the next category. The only late majority thing we're targeting is productivity use cases. Whether it's like 3D design, where we genuinely think it's going to be 10x better. The jury's still out on like meetings and conferences. I think this is really valuable. Like hanging out, meeting people in person. It's hard to still replicate that. Maybe when we have codec avatars, who knows? But I think the design use cases are really, really powerful because the alternate today is a flat screen, a Wacom tablet, or clay models, or building like models. So I think that's going to get like...
Believe it or not, like the Metaverse Fund, we have our IC meetings in VR occasionally. And so whether it's like in Contractors, whether it's in Horizons, whether it's in Putt-Putt Mini Golf, I think it's, or Around the World Mini Golf, which was called, what's interesting is that because one of the guys is in Dubai, one is in Atlanta, and I'm in Miami. On Zoom, you're missing all of the, non-verbal communication, right? And even hand motion stuff like that is captured, which will only become more when you also have eye tracking. Maybe you can get a little bit into that, like what's the path forward for adding more? You mentioned, for example, can explain to people that don't know, the codec avatars, and maybe eye tracking, and things that make it more real so that we're not looking at, very Robloxy looking characters, but rather like a digital twin of ourselves.
So I think there's like probably 2 different phases of how this will evolve. Phase 1 is a representation of yourself that will become more authentic to who you want it to be. Like, it doesn't even have to be humanoid. I mean, if you believe your identity is a goblin, or if you're a world, like this is literally a real true story. Like there are like people who are so into World of Warcraft and their clans and their raids that their identity is very different. I don't have to sit in a in a founder meeting with a suit on. So I think like expression of identity will like completely change in the short term. Eye tracking, face tracking is interesting because it captures facial body language. I think we'll continue to push that forward. But that is within the construct of like low poly. For those of you like who are outside XR, like polygons is how you represent like a structure, a three-dimensional structure, and low poly is less polygons, high poly is high polygons. The higher the poly, the more realistic things feel. I think we'll optimize all of that within the low poly set of experiences. At some point, codec avatars, which is literally, if you've seen Star Wars, like, hey, help me Obi-Wan, and it actually looks like Obi-Wan, right? Like that stuff will eventually come online over the next, 5 years or so, 6 years. Then it is actually like hollow presence. We don't know the impact on compute and network latency. So that's one of the rate limiting factors for, you use the word VR.
Yeah.
I think the future is not just VR. I think like it's, at least we've turned the dime in our own heads on like mixed reality first. First is the wrong word, mixed reality experiences, because I think things like that are rate limiting factors. It's less so that eye tracking is a rate limiting factor for people to use the headset. I think there are other foundational issues that we as an industry need to address, one of which being from VR to mixed reality. So it's a very broad answer.
But let's dive into a little bit more, because with the Quest Pro, that was the first time you guys turned on, colored pass-through. What are some of the, I guess, what are you most excited about what AR can be used for, maybe, or you're already seeing being used? I know that I saw MetaConnect, where there's a lot of really cool things from, like, learning how to play piano, where the right keys are being shown in front of you, or designing in AR, or like playing, tabletop games, in AR.
So one of the rate limiting factors we think to go from early adopters, early majority, and to cross the chasm is VR superpower has been like displacing time and displacing distance. You are transported to these wonderful worlds, but it's also super intimidating. Like many people don't use VR because suddenly they're cut off from the world. I think the first thing that mixed reality does is when you boot up Quest Pro, you actually go into your real living room. I think the familiarity matters for people who are not like hardcore nerdy gamers. So I think mixed reality, first and foremost, makes XR devices more approachable. So then the question becomes, how do you make mixed reality better? Black and white pass-through on Quest 2 is like, right? Color pass-through suddenly becomes interesting. It's no longer as warpy as it used to be, and it's only going to get better and better and better. There are broadly, I think, 3 implications for mixed reality. The first implication is if you used XR to escape, mixed reality will actually be a distraction. Who wants to see the clutter in their living room when you can actually go live in Mars? Like nobody, right? So I think the jury's out on what the impact of mixed reality is going to be on games. It worked for Pokemon Go because the device was in your pocket. We don't know yet what mixed reality is going to do for many, many things because it's an invention of a new design language. For the OGs who've been in VR, you'll like recognize this example. There used to be a title called, it still is, it's going to get sunset, Loneco, right? It created a new design mechanic of moving through a world. Because it's not a controller thing, it's like you have to like move through the world, like drag and pull, like Ender's Game. Some of the lead engineers on Loneco figured out that the mechanic is super interesting, and that led to Gorilla Tag VR, where you're moving through Gorilla Tag through the world. Same thing happened with Beat Saber. The rhythm game / mechanic was invented by Beat Saber, and then we saw Supernatural happen. So this is why I'm like so freaking long on founders. Nobody can invent the mechanics that creates magic except the people who are, as you call it, breaking their backs. They will invent it first. Others will look at it and copy it, and then it'll become a standard. And that's when it'll tip the medium forward. So it took, 6-7 years for VR to become relevant for the gaming audience enough that every Christmas we're at the top of the Play Store and the App Store. And last Christmas, we outsold Xboxes. So it's there's a microcycle at play where it's crossing the chasm for gamers. And I think what's going to end up happening is with mixed reality, you're going to start seeing that for a few other use cases. Like, it's safer in mixed reality. You can use your room. And if you add physics to objects, you can suddenly experience things in ways you couldn't before. So I'm bullish on what mixed reality will do to both access of people who come into the device and the quality of life improvement for use cases like fitness. And we already started seeing glimpses of this in productivity use cases where design use cases leverage mixed reality. So it'll actually expand the pie, but it's going to take 6 to 7 years, I think, maybe sooner, because now we have a big install base of devices and people understand what headsets are. So maybe that cycle time will shrink. But we have to go through this invention process where people like Hamza or others will have to invent new design paradigm for mixed reality, and then everyone will copy it, and then it'll become a thing.
It's so true, because I think what happened in the beginning with a lot of VR games is that people tried to copy what was done on 2D, the same interactions, for example, menu screens, which break the immersion, where much more games have found really creative ways. I think we're playing, After the Fall, where you go into this room where there's an arcade and then you select it through that, versus pulling up a menu bar and you realize, hey, I'm in a game. The more you, I guess, abstract away normal decisions that you do on a computer with point and click in a browser, but rather through physical actions, walking into a portal, interacting with objects in a room that will activate the next level and so forth. It's important, because otherwise we're just recreating what's done on 2D for VR. And I think it takes step by step. Every single founder that experiments with it finds ways to do that in more effective ways.
This happened when mobile happened too, right? For those of us who were around in 2010, the first mobile apps were mobile websites. And you had the X button on the top right. Do you remember that? And you'd poke, 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 poke. You couldn't get the X to go away. And then now all mobile apps have the hamburger menu with 3 things. And then you tap it, and then I think those design languages only come about when people have spent enough time with it to realize what doesn't work. I think we're there. Now it's a question of what else do we build that would cross the chasm for the category. For MR, nobody knows the design language. Everybody thinks it's turn pass-through on and put a bunch of virtual objects. That's not it. It's anchoring, it's physics, and it's blending of, I've seen so many okay, we can't talk about this, but there's so many things in the works. Give it a few months, and you'll actually see the first glimpses of what great mixed reality games or edutainment or fitness experiences would look like. Founders are at it as we speak. It's incredible.
What would you say, if you had to zero it in on maybe one thing, what would be that big domino that could unlock the next stage? Or is it?
Okay. I'm glad you asked this question, because I don't think that technology ever progresses in singular big dominoes. I think it's a progression of small things. Ultimately, you look back and humans rewrite the narrative as this was the moment when Steve Jobs showed the iPhone with no keyboard. That when it took off. That might be a catalyst, but I don't think it was a domino that tipped that. So if you go back to the computers, same thing. Graphical user interface was its own thing. Keyboards were their own thing. And mouse and keyboards and graphical GUIs came into play. Suddenly computers could become usable, and then someone drove the cost down, right? So it was GUI the tipping point? Maybe. Were more affordable PCs the tipping point? Maybe. So I don't think there's going to be a single big domino. I'll tell you what needs to be true for this to break out. We need to get to hundreds of millions of devices. So I'm really happy whoever's working on XR devices from HTC and Samsung and whoever else, build them, put them out in the market, help make XR relevant. So more devices, more affordable devices. It's still an expensive product relative to what people think it can do, but money is no longer a constraint for at least the wealthy part of the world. But if you want to get to like hundreds of millions of devices, like we need to make it a no-brainer. So I think first rate limiting factor is as many people as possible with affordable devices. The second rate limiting factor is going to be relevant content that increases reach and frequency of use. Like Laurent and I were talking last night about media and entertainment use cases, and like people love to play, people love to get entertained. Entertainment as use case has not been cracked, right? So sports, there's a whole host of things that creates relevancy to people. I think we need to like solve for that. And then there's foundational physics problems like compute and thermal. Cloud rendering, I think, will remove that constraint completely, because then you're not limited by the mobile chipset on the headset, and you can build high fidelity, high polygon experiences. So to me, it's like affordable headsets, relevant content, and solving some of the compute and storage problems are sort of the higher order problems to worry about. Everything else is like subsidiary to that.
Yeah. And I see with all different portfolio companies in different angles, with those can be bottlenecks that keep them from the next stage. So finally, to wrap it up, what does the future look like to you? The one other pushback I sometimes get, particularly from the moms, or the wives of the LPs, where they say, hey, you know what, I have 2 kids. This is a real story that happened, I don't know if Danny's in the room now, where, she said, look, I've got 2 kids, and I know it's a good investment, it's going to, succeed, but I don't know if that's the future I want for my kids, where they're getting more and more disconnected. We're spending so much time on social media already. We are already, spending, if you check the time on your phone, 8 hours a day on your phone. Will it make us more disconnected, or is there a way where it integrates with our physical experience, or are we just romanticizing the physical experience?
All technology, when pushed to its extremes, is harmful to humans, period. Right? Nuclear power, great for power. Was radiation good for your body? Probably not, right? And invention of the printing press, invention of electricity, invention of computers, radio, TV, the internet, like every technology wave, like there's always going to be, if we don't do it responsibly, there'll be cost to it, and we're learning this as a society. So I fully empathize with that argument of like, is this the future we want? But I don't think the future is all dystopian. If we actually are thoughtful about it, I'll tell you 2 personal examples, and then like, please go download the Quest app. I'll tell you 4 apps to go look at. Just go read their reviews and see what people are talking about. So 2 personal stories. I grew up before the computers were ever a thing, and before internet was a thing. You guys remember the dial-up modem sound? That's like trauma. Like, I remember that. I couldn't afford a computer and I couldn't afford internet connections. The only way I got access to the internet was when I went to timeshare internet cafes. Has anybody used that before? Gone there? Yeah. And like, I used to like have side hustles, save money, and I would go log on the internet. And I remember going on AOL and chatting with somebody in downtown Manhattan. And I grew up in a really small town in India. And the irony is like, it's not lost on me that I'm sitting here today. It only happened because I got access to technology. There's millions and millions of kids and people around the world right now for whom this will change the economic opportunity that they can access. In fact, like, I remember Inga sent me an email note from a student in Colombia. I don't remember the exact words, but literally like, hey, I have an industrial design course. I couldn't get the resources to do what I needed. Thankfully, because of Shapes, I was able to design something and submit my thesis. Thank you for making this product. Happens all the freaking time. So go check out some comments on Shapes. Go look at Inner World. Incredible product for mental wellness. It's group therapy. Think of like Alcoholics Anonymous, except that for all the other stuff. There are kids in there like who are coming out to their community, expressing their identity even before the real world, because it's a really safe space to go do that. And mental wellness is a big thing where I think if done right, all of us know healthcare is broken. Regulated healthcare is especially broken. Direct-to-consumer, over-the-counter will work, but the experiences are like getting on a telephone call with a therapist is all we have today. There's a great example of a product called Retreat. Retreat is like masterclass for XR. But instead of just watching an expert talk at you, there's a module, for example, on shame. And the the expert is talking to you about how to deal with shame. Right next to the expert, there's a mannequin, a 3D mannequin. The exercise you do is to write your shame on the mannequin, like what is causing you and driving you shame. At the end of the exercise, you break that mannequin and you release the shame. You can't do that on flat. You can't do that unless you're in a therapist's office. So I think mental wellness is another part. Education is like undoubtedly something that's going to change. Like I'm working with this, I can talk about because we've started like working. There's a team we're working with that's trying to bring scratch programming into XR. If you can grab blocks, like move 5 steps, turn right, turn left, a little robot will walk on your table in mixed reality. And if you haven't programmed it right, it'll fall off the table, right? I will do this with my kid, right? So I think there's like a lot more projects like this around edutainment that's interesting. So my belief is if we're thoughtful about this, we can unlock economic opportunity, health outcomes, and educational outcomes. If we're irresponsible about this, I think we will end up in a dystopian world. But luckily, in our lifetimes, we've seen what we need to do to be more responsible. So my belief is I think we will, as best as we can, we should try. We won't be perfect, but like not trying is not an option.
Amazing. I want to give a major thank you to both like you and Meta because you are so boots on the ground. About 30% of our portfolio founders have gotten grants and funding from Meta. And I know how hard they work. And I love that you have such a close relationship with them. You know by their first name, you know what they're working on. And I think that means a lot. So thank you so much for being here today and, championing the cause.
Thanks, guys.
Anand does.